Hello, everyone, and welcome to another Conversations in Time podcast. So, over to the guys.
Hello, and welcome to another Conversations in Time podcast. I'm John N.
And I'm Ian G.
Oh, you weren't there then for a minute?
What?
Well, for a sec.
Opinion. I think opinions that that. I frequently have that impression when I'm talking. Hello, is he actually there? No. Yes, I am. Yeah.
Right, so today, Ian, where are we going, or what we're going to talk about today?
So this is a kind of a part two. It's not really a part two, but it sort of is. We talked about what would happen if Britain had not joined the First World War on the last podcast, and the conversation took us well away from the primary purpose, really, what would happen to Britain. So we talked about all sorts of things, Austro-Hungary and Russia,
and France in
Poland,
particular,
and all sorts of stuff. Yeah, in France, yeah. So we thought we'd have a part two just to redress that issue in terms of what the impact to Britain might have been had it not joined the First World War. So we're trying to keep away from tangents and stuff. Easier said than done, as you.
Well, yeah. Well, we'll see how that one goes.
Tangent is our middle name.
That's right. Yeah.
In fact, we should have had a podcast that says people go for tangents. But anyway,
After the tangents, maybe we ought to. Maybe that would be a sister broadcast, or sister podcast.
or two blokes can't keep on topic for more than 30 seconds. But anyway.
So, as a quick recap, then we were saying on the last podcast that the driver for Britain entering the First World War arguably was the invasion of Belgium by Germany, and that I think we were sort of the assumption was that would have been slightly different, and enough of a difference to enable Britain to take a step back and not feel too bad about not supporting Belgium. Or Belgium agreed to have the Germans go through and then accept the recompense later that they promised.
Yeah.
So, right. So the Germans have gone through. They've essentially started the war with France. Where do we go next then? Where do we want to just go straight to, the First World War's ended. Our conclusion was Germany would have won. Europe would be in a different state. France would be in turmoil. Russia would be basically the same. They would have had their revolution. The Eastern Front would have essentially stopped. The negotiated peace that they had would have been roughly the same, which was that the land they lost to the Germans would have still been lost. And then we start from there. Do we want to do that?
Yeah, because we covered the machinations of the actual what could have happened during the war years previously. So I think we should.
Okay.
Although I suppose we should talk about a little bit before having just said that we should talk as to what people would think and what Britain would be doing during the Second World War. So the First World War. We did. Obviously, just because Britain was neutral. It still has about the world's biggest navy, all the other navies combined, sort of thing. It's still got a massive trading bloc with its empire and its dominions. So it would have been a very aggressive neutral state. It wouldn't have been Switzerland or Ireland or something, as well the Second World War, who had no ability to influence anything, even though they were neutral. It would have heavily enforced its neutrality, shall we say? That might have resulted in some flashpoints. Obviously at sea primarily. It's hard to imagine anywhere else. I mean, maybe in some of the colonies around Africa. If it thought that the Germans were doing too much locally there, or the French were doing too much, it might have flexed its muscles, such as they were.
But it would largely be in the Channel. Would be where any conflict. I'm trying to think of the right word now. Friction. I think. Yeah. Would have occurred. It wouldn't have occurred anywhere else, on the globe as such, because the Germans would have been focused on defeating France, obviously.
And it depends how quickly
front.
Yeah, and it depends how quickly France was defeated. I think we said about a year and a bit, didn't we?
We were certainly talking maybe a bit longer than that. But 1916, 1917. So 2-3 years, something like that.
Yeah, but I mean, I think it would have been a lot of tension because.
Oh yeah.
Because we're not proposing a complete rewrite of history. So the tensions that were in place before 1914 was still there, and then so we decided not to join the First World War. But I don't think the Royal Navy would be very happy as the German High Seas Fleet was, sailing down the southern North Sea into the Channel, unobserved. No, we wouldn't do it unobserved, would they? So it's difficult to see how you send out your fleet to make sure so some other fleet doesn't do anything it shouldn't do.
So I mean, we might have been, there could have been some bossing about in the English Channel with the Royal Navy.
Yeah, so I don't think, I think it's important.
Restricting them, but not actually stopping them from doing stuff.
Yeah, so yes, exactly. So we're aggressively defending the territorial limits and all that sort of stuff. So you can envisage that Germany wouldn't be a friend. So it'd be, we'd like, all right, so so it's just we're not fighting you doesn't mean we're friends. France would feel betrayed. Probably have a point there. So again, they would be very much like the sort of the Vichy, if you like, in the Second World War, who would find, to a certain extent, the betrayal of the British worse than the actual defeat from the Germans.
But then you could argue that, and I'm taking a bit of a step back, and we're off to the tangent here, but the Franco-Prussian War, the French didn't feel aggrieved that the British didn't help.
No, but there was no Entente Cordiale and all that sort of stuff, and there was no...
Yeah, but the Entente, as we know, the Entente Cordiale isn't really...
I know that, but it's still an agreement, isn't it? It's still an agreement, isn't it? And, it's less like saying if somebody agrees to meet you...
No, but the agreement wasn't to defend France if somebody attacked their border.
No, it was but it wasn't...
That's what I'm saying. So there was an agreement.
Friendly, but no, you're right. But I think they would be pretty aggrieved. And there was I discovered, I think you heard it as well through some other sources, that, Britain agreed that the French could withdraw their major fleet units to the Mediterranean. It's a long way back from the Mediterranean. So but anyway, yeah. Irrespective of whether they got a point of view, I think that whether you agree with their point of view, I think they would be aggrieved, and I think they've certainly got an argument there to be aggrieved. But they'd have bigger fish to fry.
So maybe later on, but when we come on to a bit later in the century, our viewers, what would happen in France? We wouldn't necessarily be a friendly or somebody that would be. No,
and if I recall,
ally with whoever.
Well, that's bad news, because if I recall what our conclusions were, so let's well, we might. Why don't we do that now? Because it's a thread, isn't it? Our conclusions were that Germany wouldn't. And correct me if I'm wrong, obviously. I think our conclusions were that Germany wouldn't occupy France in the same way it did in the Second World War. It would be a Franco-Prussian type scenario where it would change. It would have a change of government. It would humiliate the frontier, and it might take a bit of land. As it took Alsace-Lorraine in 1870. Whether there's an equivalent piece of land to take, it might demilitarize. It might put a big demilitarized zone.
Yeah,
insist there's no, and then, but we did say that France would go into, because of its turmoil. It was in turmoil anyway half the time in the early 1900s of anarchists and communists and
revolutionaries.
Yeah. So I think we came to the conclusion that eventually some nasty piece of work we would take over in France. So having some nasty piece of work in charge of France, yes, it was defeated, but it wasn't destroyed like Germany was in the Second World War. So you've got a very armed, aggressive country 20 miles away, albeit across the Channel, who think you've stabbed them in the back and are pseudo-fascist stroke.
And then we've been at war with many times.
Indeed. Well, that's always been to the detriment of both countries, obviously, isn't it?
Well, yeah. Well, I'm saying it's not necessarily would be a massive change. I mean, don't forget,
this is the
1815. It was only 30, 40 years before the Franco-Prussian War.
This is the 1920s, with poison gas and airships and bombers and 20 miles away. So I mean, if nothing else, Britain did a massive amount of the demilitarization. It's not quite the right word, but I can't think of the word. Anyway, getting rid of its army and all the rest of it, and not spending any money on its navy, and did spend any money on its army. It would would not have that luxury with France being belligerent. So
yeah, but I mean, we're not talking like 1920. Because France would have been in turmoil for many.
Well, I really meant 1920s, if truth be told. But yeah.
Well,
so many years. Germany wasn't in turmoil for that many years, and it was defeated in a similar manner that we're proposing. I mean, it was yes, it had some.
It was, but it didn't fall into some civil war, which we were saying was one of the consequences of. We did, yeah.
Who was on which side? Perhaps the listeners can.
Yeah, well, we were talking about there being a communist faction as well as a right-wing faction in France.
Well, okay.
It was.
Yeah. Oh,
Yeah.
you're absolutely right. That's great, because we did make reference to Spain, didn't we?
Yeah, it wasn't that they just capitulated and then eventually some strong man.
No, you're right. You're right.
That only happened because of the internal conflict was then won by one of the factions.
Yeah, but anyway, so they'll belong. Well, even having said that, so a civil war in one of your neighbouring inverted commas across the sea countries is never a good thing either, is it? So it would be, the quiet 1920s of economic decline in Britain would have still had economic decline, but they would have been.
Well, I think there's something else to talk about first, Ryan. So forget it. So we'll come on to the economy.
Yeah.
Right. So let's just talk about societal changes, because there were some quite big changes in society because of the First World War. So one of the big ones, I believe, was that the things like the suffragette movement, because women were encouraged to work during the war and provided, a massive effort, support in providing that, in working, that they got the vote. That was one of
Did they? I don't think working class women and working class men didn't get the vote till 1928. Universal suffrage, with no excuses of, you had to be a ratepayer and you had to be the head of the household or this nonsense. I don't think that was got rid of in 1928. But to be fair, that's still in our time. That's still in our time bubble.
But don't forget, you wouldn't have had you wouldn't have had women going into the workplace.
Yeah, but since when have the ruling classes in Great Britain ever cared about working class?
No, they haven't. This is one of the things that I'm trying to get onto, is that the First World War changed this ruling class thing, because a lot of the ruling classes got killed. Now, that wouldn't have happened, and we'd have still had a much bigger ruling class.
I'm not sure any more. I'm not sure any more of the ruling class have killed anybody else, were they?
Well, considering there's less of them, and what was why was the decline of, for example, people working in service? That was a definite societal change after the First World War. That people before the First World War, it was one of the career paths a lot of people could take.
I think basically because for you,
and after the First World War,
even though the wages were crap, you could still get paid better somewhere else, and you didn't have to live in. You didn't have to get up at 3 o'clock in the morning, and you didn't have to go to bed at 12 o'clock at night. You might have a trade union. I think that was the general.
No, I think the First World War had I don't think. My personal opinion is that the First World War had a change in British society.
Yeah, but no, I don't think
it would have happened anyway, and I think it might have happened, but it would have been later.
I don't think that was caused by people. I don't think the original, the true path, shall we say, I don't think that was caused by people in the upper classes dying. I don't think, even if they did, there's always a third cousin, who these country houses or country estates are frequently inherited by people who have nothing to do as such with the family in a conventional sense. But
I wouldn't know, because I'm not somebody who's going to inherit a mansion. But all I'm saying is that is something that happened as a consequence. I believe as a consequence of the First World War, for whatever the reasons were. It definitely, it happened after.
Well, it's more likely. I mean, it certainly happened after the Second World War, because they brought in punitive inheritance taxes. Quite right too.
Well, yeah, but we're not talking about the Second World War.
Well, I know, but I'm just going to say whether there was an equivalent, not quite as punitive, because it didn't involve knocking buildings down and stuff so much in the 1920s, as far as I know. But you're right. There certainly was it was more a question of people not being able to afford staff rather than. So it's
why wouldn't they? Why? Because if nothing changes in Britain, nothing changes. There was no, don't forget, we're talking about Britain not being involved in the war, so there was no war effort.
Yeah, but I suppose we've got to figure out
arms, any of that.
Got to figure out what caused people to increase the requirements for wages. As what's the term? What's the term when you're working as a servant or whatever? What's in service?
Yeah.
What caused that price inflation, or the wage inflation, isn't it? And would that wage inflation have happened as well? So,
well, we don't know. I mean, but the war, there's no doubt that having people moving into factories and earning potentially more money because there were jobs there, and those jobs wouldn't be there if we weren't in the First World War. Why would they move if there's no jobs for them to go to?
Yeah, but those jobs in the 1920s weren't associated with.
No, I'm talking about during the First World War. Don't forget there was lots of jobs created.
Oh yeah, okay, I can see your point. Yeah, yeah. Oh, sorry, I kind of missed what you meant then. Sorry, it's always.
No, I'm saying that.
But yeah, you're saying that happened. That happened during the war rather than at the end of it.
Yeah, yeah.
Right. Okay, I'm with you now.
So there's a massive war effort.
Yes, but that's interesting, though, isn't it?
Come to these factories and we'll pay you decent money. Well, people will.
Indeed, but look what happened in the Second World War in America. America's employment when America's economy, its New Deal and all that stuff, getting out the depression of 1930s was supercharged by making and selling weapons to France and Britain, and then ultimately Britain, because France drops out of the war. Just because Britain's neutral doesn't mean to say it's not selling arms to anybody.
I know, but it's not going to suddenly have a massive.
Well,
I mean, don't forget,
it's like 40, but it's
yeah, but America was already a big industrial country.
That wasn't making arms. It wasn't making planes and tanks and stuff until.
Oh no, but, and we've talked about this before. One of the things they were making a lot of was cars, and so they had big factories manufacturing large mechanical capabilities. That wasn't true in Britain. We weren't making.
Not in 1914. No, that's absolutely true. But the what I'm saying, all right, there would have been some uptake or upturn in arms manufacturing, not to the same extent. I get that, not to the same extent as building arms and weapons for your own massive army that subsequently was made in the real timeline, which wouldn't have existed otherwise. So there would have been a mild uptick in industrial capacity, but not much.
Yeah, so
not much. I mean, that's not correct. It wouldn't have been as overwhelming as it was in the original timeline.
So all I'm saying is that means that whatever the society looked like before, in 1912, probably would have looked pretty similar in 1920. It wouldn't have been that much different in 1921. Yes, I'm not saying it wouldn't change, but I'm just saying that that would have been drifting off. Now, what about the empire then? Wasn't the empire? Didn't that the First World War and the fact that we used soldiers from empire countries create this seed of independence?
Well, no, because
as a date.
Not really, because there is a thread there, but let me.
But it wouldn't be there if we had.
Well, so let me just, in my opinion, put you right there, John, because they weren't empire countries; they were dominion countries. Australia, and Canada, New Zealand were British dominions. That means they became independent in 1901 and 1905. They were not part of the empire. They were dominion. They were running themselves. But that said, interestingly enough, Gallipoli, Vimy Ridge, and Gallipoli covers New Zealand as well. Let's go back a sec. Gallipoli is seen as the birth of modern Australia, not modern New Zealand, because they were independently fighting the Turks, albeit there was as many British soldiers there as well. But they were throwing their weights the wrong. But what's the word? Not throwing your weight, but pulling your weight. They were pulling their weight in a world stage. And it was traumatic, and it was horrible, and all the rest of it. So that's why, if an Australian tourist, a young backpacker comes to Europe, they tend to go to Turkey and always go to Gallipoli. Ditto Vimy Ridge. I mean, Vimy Ridge was a Canadian battle, horrendous as usual. First World War. Again, in our time, none of these things happened. So again, that was the birthplace of modern Canada in inverted commas. I mean, not if you're a Native American, obviously, but that's how some people saw it. So those things wouldn't have happened. So it would have had some impact on Australia, New Zealand, Canada. Now, you could argue maybe that not having had a shared experience with Great Britain in the First World War, it might have pushed them quicker to have full independence. Basically means that the British legal system isn't imposed through the House of Lords. So it was only till relatively recently that Canada, for example, removed the British House in the 1980s. Canada removed the House of Lords as its Supreme Court, created its own Supreme Court. Now, that without the shared environment of the First World War and the Second World War, and I can't speak for Australia. It must have had a similar timeline. I mean, the British Governor General of Australia sacked the Prime Minister in 1974.
No, that's right. Yeah. That probably wouldn't have. I mean, because my view is that it would have slowed down any.
No, I disagree completely.
But then if we're talking, it was 60 years later.
Well, it's not independence. They were already independent.
What I'm saying is
complete separation from the UK.
Yeah. So the the removal of any British legal authority
Yeah, indeed. That's the word. Yeah.
would have gone. Yeah, obviously, if it was 60 years later, both of it doesn't matter what our view is. It probably still would have been in those timescales because it's 60 years.
Yeah, but I think it would have
I
had.
don't think it would have been any quicker.
No, I disagree because I think there wouldn't have been a shared. The Boer War caused a bit of a nasty taste in Australia and New Zealand because it was a pointless war ultimately, and Australia and New Zealand contributed a lot of troops, and what was the point of all that? The First World War, yeah, you could argue what was the point of all that, but you're fighting.
But then that's my view is that I think that the Australia and New Zealand, maybe not Canada as much, I don't know, saw it as why did the ordinary people saying why did we get involved in a war that's thousands and thousands of miles away and has no issue, has no impact on those countries.
That's not a sentiment that existed in Australia and New Zealand. It just didn't. It was fighting for the mother country. I mean, it's all very bizarre now, and it was already bizarre for Australians now. But that's the way they saw it. The same way as the Second World War. After the Second World War, they happily took all Britain's nuclear tests and stuck it in Australia, and the Australians were happy to do it. It's I wouldn't say it's incomprehensible, but they very much had this concept of the mother country forged through shared experiences. Now, if you don't have those shared experiences, I think those ties, which has happened since the Second World War, and to a certain extent it's happened in Britain. If you don't have those shared experiences in a society, you split apart and become selfish, become English and Scottish and Welsh and Irish and Australian and New Zealand and Canadian. You're not that. We've had the shared experience of the First World War, which was pointless, but it was a shared experience, and the Second World War, which we had no choice in, blah 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 blah. So it's not often I completely disagree with you, John, but I think you've got that wrong.
Well, well, we can agree to disagree.
Yeah.
I still think that the Commonwealth, if the UK, Britain hadn't been in the First World War, might have been something that Britain relied on more than it.
What do you mean by the Commonwealth? The
Commonwealth. We wouldn't have been trading with France and Germany. Right? I mean, they were a market that we.
No, absolutely. I'm not suggesting that we've become arch enemies of Australia, but Australia was totally reliant on British trade, as was New Zealand, sheep and wool and all the rest of it. They didn't have any other industries. They didn't even really have much mining because the things they're mining now are quite difficult. Were quite difficult to get to in the 1920s, and some of them weren't even things that anybody wanted. But so
all right, so you've got a stronger view on me than. A stronger view on this than me. So, arguably, the ties with the mother country would have been severed early. Yeah, it depends on what. Ultimately, it depends on what else would have happened in the century. And there's no Second World War, but it doesn't mean say that there wouldn't have been some other European.
Or about it might not, but it might have been against who's the correct.
Well, that's right. So the chances of a second European conflict were probably still just as strong.
100%. But just going back to but it's something I even thought about. So it's 9 out of 10 for the thread. I just think the path of the thread we disagree with. Well, that's fine. That's why there's two of us having a conversation. It's not a monologue.
Okay, so another one then was, and this I got off ChatGPT, because I always ask it these sorts of questions. And
what American AIs?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, unfortunately. Well, if you can name a British AI that I could ask the question, I would do that.
Ask Jeeves.
And
whatever happened to that?
And one of the things, and this is what this one, you'll have a view on this. So the war caused significant political turmoil in Britain, contributing to the decline of the Liberal Party and the rise of the Labour Party. Without the war, who knows what would have happened to the British Party? So if the war created the working class support for a better political party to look after their needs, depends whether you believe that that's an acceptable statement or not.
Yes, I've just cogitating that. It's. What do you think? He says, passing the buck.
Well, I think there's an element of truth in it. I think that when you've got thousands of hundreds of thousands of people dying, and there's lots of it highlights issues with the nature of the country itself, in terms of helping people and who's actually looking after the I'm waffling a bit here. I'm just trying, it's
Well, you're saying
it's a
basically
way
the
of
war created a togetherness, which
it
then,
sort of opened people's eyes to the fact
well, exactly.
that they
So,
were
I
being
mean,
told what to do by people
Well, yeah,
who were
there's also-
farther up the social scale than they were.
there's also the betrayal of the soldiers, because there was Liberals made a promise of Lloyd George made a promise of a land fit for heroes, going to build lots of houses.
Yeah, no, that's right. Yeah,
They didn't do that. Now, to be fair, despite what you might believe on, media, and I don't mean social media, I mean like films and books, there was no roaring 20s in Britain. Britain had a series of major depressions through the 1920s. Industries failed. There was a general strike, blah, blah, blah. And part of that was a betrayal of, these were all young, well, they weren't all young, but these were all men in their 20s or the, 18s to 40. That's the prime workforce to a certain extent of the country. And there was 3 to 6 million of them, with one form or another, working either in the army or in war munitions factories, alongside women as well. But the heavy industry, the tank, well, there weren't many tanks, but the ships and the guns, primarily male sort of stuff. So those people were betrayed, inverted commas. I mean, whether they were betrayed or whether they were naive is always
well, that's it. So, but then that wouldn't have happened.
correct.
So that means, people only vote for massive change like this when there is some sort of social upheaval, like a war.
Well,
Now, if that hadn't have happened and things, we basically agreed that things would have roughly stayed the same. So before the First World War, life in Britain would have carried on largely the same.
it did largely the same even in the
Well, no,
line.
but there's no betrayal. There would have been no betrayal. Why? If this,
so you mean there was no land hit for free? Yeah, but then
if you haven't got a trigger to get people to,
but you're giving too much credit to the existing Liberal and Conservative Party of the day, because just because they haven't betrayed
but
anybody.
why would people suddenly start demanding another?
Yeah, but people don't. Well, you can argue the same about the Reform Party and the Tea Party in America. And Trump isn't a Republican, and they haven't had any.
Yeah, but we know what
They've only-
that's largely a right wing thing based on flipping immigration. So there's
Well, it might be a right
trigger of
thing, but it's
sort.
mostly working class, isn't it? But
No, but there's still something that people are getting they're hooked on. They get
yeah, but people get hooked on.
All I'm saying is the First World War, there was no hook. What would people go? Oh well, France is a funny country. We need a new political party. I don't see that.
There's no evidence that, unlike the Second World War, that people voted. I would have to Google it exactly, but the Labour didn't form a government till at least 1928 from memory. Ramsay MacDonald. So there was no great.
But like you're saying, that was after all of the general strike and
but that was because of Britain's poor economic performance, and that was in the wind from the early 1900s. That was a general decline, and then failure to keep up with technology. So other countries took, well, not completely, because Britain was still probably the second or third biggest economy, but America did all sorts of things with new industries that Britain struggled.
Well, the Labour Party existed before then. I mean, all I'm trying to say,
it had at least 20 to 30 MPs in the First World War. You have to Google it. I'm sure it did. Keir Hardie had been an MP for 15 years, at least by that point. And I think, but you're right. I think there's a natural drift towards the Labour Party. It would be significantly slower. So you're right. I agree with you. But
yeah, I'm not saying there wouldn't have been a Labour Party. I'm just saying that the timings would have been.
Yeah, but then there's the external events, isn't there? I mean, there's the Great Depression of the 1930s, caused not exclusively in America, but caused by crazy stock market practices in America, which almost certainly were happening in this country, but obviously it being much poorer. But it's not much poorer. Let me rephrase that. The wealth being concentrated in a much higher strata of society. There was less speculation in the stock market than there was in America. But again, that activity would have still impacted Britain. There was still, there would have been no difference to the Great Depression of 1929, 1930, and all the rest of it. So that would have come along. That caused the national government in this country, which we won't go into, but that might have been a Labour government instead of a national government. Labour was still the biggest party, but just couldn't form a majority. But Yeah, so I think you're right. I think it would have slowed it down. But
it could have slowed it down by 20 years in terms of it becoming a serious, being able to win an election and form a government.
Yeah.
I mean, it does actually create it's funny, it just struck me that what would we see the potential knock-on effects for the NHS, because that was never a Liberal Tory thing. That was a Labour Party. I know it was after the Second World War, but there wouldn't have been a Second World War. There wouldn't have been a Labour Party. The Labour Party wouldn't have been in the same. I know we're going off. It's like
other countries,
it would have impacted it.
Plenty of other countries turned socialist and had and have universal.
Yeah, but I thought Britain was the first, wasn't it?
Well, that's a good question, actually. So that's not a question you hear asked very often. Which, I mean, not the Scandinavian countries now are deemed to be socialist. Well, that's a post-Second World War thing. I mean, obviously, so at least one of them, two of them were occupied by the Germans, so they weren't anything after the Second World War, during the Second World War, obviously. But Sweden was quite right-wing at the time. So that's a 1950s thing. So I don't know, I'm struggling off the top of my head to think of anywhere else. I mean, it's mostly a post-Second World War. It's countries you associate with being socialist or Christian Democrat, Socialist Democrat, Social Democrat rather. Germany swings from left to right. Austria used to be traditionally quite socialist. Switzerland, no, obviously. France has had its periods, but again, no, you're right. So was Britain the first socialist country in 1945? Probably was. What does ChatGPT think? But
it says it's regarded as one of the first.
Oh, hedging its
so it says Russia or the Soviet Union.
Well, that's nonsense. That is. Russia's never been socialist.
I didn't say it. So I was saying the first universal health service is the question.
Oh, right. Sorry. Right. Okay. Well, universal health service. What, you can die this way or you can die that way. Oh, fair enough. Oh, well, thanks. Yeah. Yeah.
And so, New Zealand.
Ah, yeah. No, I think I've heard that before. Yeah. Yeah. But the point being,
1930s. So.
Why do you, or what do we think it
was only free hospital care. So anyway.
Yeah. What do we think was the cause of the setting up the NHS? Yeah.
Well, no, I wasn't.
Catalyst was the Second World War, but that wasn't the only thing, was it?
No, but what I'm trying to point out is that it was, driven by the Labour Party. And if the Labour Party was later, say it was 5 years later, then the NHS would have been potentially 5 years later. That's all I was trying.
Yeah. Well, it was driven by the Labour Party, but when we got past certain reactionary types in the Conservative Party, they like Winston Churchill being the prime one, they never once decided to undo it, shall we say?
No, I know. I'm just trying to think of some of the potential longer.
No, you're right. So
there's a Labour Party being weaker for longer.
Yeah. I mean, what we haven't, one thing that has crossed my mind is what the reputational, strategic, economic impact of Britain not joining the First World War would be. I mean, it depends. It's we haven't got time to go into what would happen to Germany and what would, and I think
we do have to talk about another country which we haven't talked about yet.
Well, let me just finish this. Is that I think Britain would be seen as not. There's this term perfidious Albin, which basically don't trust them as far as you can chuck them. Britain would be seen as not trustworthy.
No, but why would you say that?
Because they promised to help France and didn't.
No, but that isn't what. Yeah, but that isn't where we are. We didn't say that Britain didn't join the First World War because they promised France.
Yeah, I mean, but the point being is they did. The Entente Cordiale existed, and if you treat a gentleman's agreement, that's fine, and I accept it is. But if you have a gentleman's agreement and you don't act like a gentleman, people are not going to trust you again, are they? If you have
my understanding was that that was only part of the deal with the French. I thought that the British Foreign Minister, who kept everything to himself, had promised the French that
but the Entente Cordiale wasn't a
hard and fast treaty.
Oh, correct, but it's a gentleman's agreement.
So it's just not a. Yeah, but the gentleman's agreement wasn't being held by everybody in the government. It was only being held by the foreign minister.
Well, no, when I say I don't mean our gentleman. I mean the term a gentleman's agreement. I don't mean Edward Grey, the gentleman.
Yeah.
So, well, the Entente Cordiale was the thing. It was talked about in the newspapers. The Royal Navy and the French Navy had joint exercises on the basis of the Entente Cordiale. It was a thing. Now, I agree it wasn't legally binding, such as that means anything in international sense. But if you have an agreement...
and it wasn't a defence pact either.
Correct, but it was an ability. It was an agreement not to interfere with each other and to be mutually supportive of each other. And I suppose
But you could argue that if we policed the Channel and prevented the German Navy from doing anything particularly bad, then it could be saying, well, we're meeting our objectives.
Well, okay, but the interesting thing is that in the original timeline, people in Britain found it sufficiently binding to actually go to the assistance of France. So it must have meant something to a lot of people. And if you choose, all right, but it must have meant nothing to a lot of people. But so in our timeline, nothing to me people are the majority.
And there was all the publicity about the Germans and the Belgian nonsense.
Yeah, and Britain
that definitely had an impact.
Britain had a legally binding treaty with Belgium to
that's right. That was different.
So again, if you choose to ignore that, Britain's reputation is shit. But then you think, well, we're the biggest navy, we're the second biggest economy, or the third biggest economy, so what, we can live with that. But then countries that go around cheating on allies who need allies, because Britain has always needed allies. Every country needs allies. Who's going to be your next ally? So Britain would be very much alone. Don't
forget. So what about the US then? I mean, they weren't particularly.
You wouldn't trust them as far as you can chuck them.
I know, but they would be an ally and a trading partner.
Only if it benefited them.
Well, it's
America's never done anything.
It still doesn't mean that they wouldn't be a ally or a
Britain's never done anything. So America's never done anything of the goodness of its heart. But they only came into the Second World War if they'd been attacked. But which is another what if you've not, have you done that one already? I don't know, but probably up for me.
We haven't done one about. Well, everybody talks about.
But my point being is there would have been ramifications. I don't think it would have amounted to very much, but
No, there were, because I think those things. Okay, well, yeah, people might have some distaste after, from a treaty that was signed many years before, and don't forget France would be in a completely different state. Germany wouldn't care that.
Yeah, but who's Britain's ally then?
Well, you could
French,
argue. Well, you could argue that with the Kaiser being half British and grandson of the Queen Victoria,
Quarter British, but I don't know. Right. No, you're right. No, you're right. You're right. I was thinking the Queen Victoria. That was you're right. He was yeah.
And let's face it, a lot of our everybody talks about our royal family being German. So
But
so there's obviously some association. There's some association with Germany. So
you can't go around breaking international treaties and agreeing things with other countries and then not doing any of those things and then think, oh, we're still honourable and people can still trust us. Again, going back to your Australia and New Zealand stuff, that might be another reason why they'd quickly. What's the point in being allied with Great Britain when patently, even the country.
But just as interest, are you saying that? Obviously Germany broke treaties. Have the French ever broken the treaty then?
I don't know. I'm not French. I don't know. But
probably. But they French broke other treaties.
What's people's opinion of the French? You can't trust them as far as you can chuck them either, can you? Britain has this. Britain has this not opinion. What's the reputation of upholding law, and this is an original timeline of fighting the good fight. Well, if you choose not to uphold the legally binding treaties and or expressions of goodwill with your neighbours and not fight the good fight, well, you lose all that. Now, does that have a tangible benefit to the bloke down the pit in South Yorkshire? No, of course it doesn't. But it has some impact. I don't know what that is, but it has some impact. I think it has kind of an economic impact because people look around and think, well, do you want to do business with them? And even if it's only 1% or 10%, I think it would have an impact on the dominions of the empire, because the empire's been held against its own wishes anyway. So it has an opinion. And there's probably a book in there, but I'm certainly not going to write it. But anyway, that was just my one thought that we hadn't.
If we ever have any listeners,
look to the
it'd be nice to get some feedback on this.
Yeah, the reputational impact of Britain would be huge. There would be no. It's a completely different war, but there would be no Battle of Britain if Britain hadn't fought the Battle of Britain, etc., etc. The Second World War would not have been the same, which is true. So there would be none of that. It would have been completely different, and it's all your fault because you didn't go and help the French and the Belgians. Just saying.
Well, yeah.
Perfidious.
Although, at the beginning I did say if Belgium had agreed to the Russians, to the Germans going through, so it didn't.
Right. No, I agree.
Then we wouldn't have broken that treaty.
Yeah.
And that could have been one of the reasons why we didn't join the First World War.
Yeah. Yes, if the Belgians...
That was definitely a stronger treaty.
If the Belgians hadn't asked for help, so to speak.
That's right. So, we have to come up with the reasons as to why we didn't join, and that could be one of them. But anyway,
I thought we'd...
we're going to run out of time now as well. And we, again...
Well, because
I think I talked about the US. Now, we haven't got time to talk about the US because I think that's another...
The
we might have to have a part 3 at this
conversations time USA, but in a completely different podcast. Anyway.
But yeah, maybe
we need an American for that. You know anybody?
Sorry, we might have to try and find somebody who's... it would be... there was no doubt that the First World War had an impact on the US.
Well, you say that. There's no disputing that. Because I think about 100,000 US soldiers were killed, which is an incredible number. But it's not just me that's making this up. The First World War is completely unknown. Obviously not completely. I don't mean literally unknown, but it's essentially completely unknown in America. No interest, no knowledge. It's very odd. And twice as many people killed as in Vietnam. But already Vietnam was more recent. But it's just very peculiar. It's
Oh, that's right. But like I said, we're not going to talk about it now because we're going to run out of time. But the economic boost in the
obvious thing is the primary thing that brought the America into the First World War was unrestricted submarine warfare. There would be no unrestricted submarine warfare in the First World War because A, it wasn't long enough and there wasn't enough submarines in our timeline, and B, the Royal Navy wouldn't allow the Germans to do it. That would be part of being neutral, and the Germans would have no reason to attack British merchant trade and French merchant trade. I don't know if that was, I don't know how, without looking at the statistics, I don't know how much of their foodstuffs are imported in comparison to Britain's, which is huge and always has been. How much of the raw materials are imported? It's probably similar, but it's a bit much.
Well, but I wouldn't have thought from a food perspective because it's a very rural country.
Well, exactly, it's much bigger than Britain, and they've got the Mediterranean and all the rest of it. So so it's not so there wouldn't have been any submarine warfare to speak of. Therefore, America wouldn't be bothered because so probably not.
So on that bombshell, then,
yeah,
and maybe we'll have a chat about whether we do a potential third episode.
What about America?
Well, yeah, just see where that takes.
Well, the mileage in there. We got some good listeners. Is that the word for a podcast in America? So why not? Yeah, let's schedule that.
Well, I think they can't watch it because we don't video it. They have to listen.
Good point. Yes, they could be. Yes, they could be. They could be looking at the little graph going up and down on, or whatever it is on.
That's right. Yeah, it might not be the next episode, but I think
but
third one.
Definitely,
we should do. Yeah. Let's see if we're even trying to get a guest.
So it's interesting. Exactly. It's interesting, isn't it? Again, it shows the impact of the original timeline. It's massive because there's a gazillion threads here, and not, in my opinion, none of them are clear cut.
No, it's such a pivotal moment in world history.
Yeah,
and it really is. Okay, right. So, thanks everybody for listening, and hopefully that's been a bit of food for thought. As ever, you know where to leave any comments or feedback on Twitter, ORC_time, or we have a Facebook page. Just search for Conversations in Time and look for the green and black squares or the time tunnel. And, found the right one. We really look forward to any feedback. So, happy with...
Some feedback would be good.
Some feedback, yeah. Good. Really keen to get somebody slagging us off or praising us or whatever. Happy either way. Or anyway. Right, so thanks a lot. We shall be speaking to you again soon. Bye for now.
Bye.
That's it. Now we know you enjoyed that. Or maybe you didn't. But why not let us know what you think? But you can go on Twitter, or X if that's the way you get dressed, and search for ORC_time to find us. On Facebook, simply search for Conversations in Time and leave your thoughts right there.